Ukraine will win. It's just a question of time. It's just a question of how much senseless slaughter Russia perpetrates. Canada today is announcing an additional range of sanctions on over 160 entities focused on the Shadow Fleet, as we should.
Canada just made a move that could become a serious problem for Russia. After a key meeting with Ukraine, a powerful new action was announced, putting fresh pressure on parts of Russia's war machine. But this was only the beginning, as bigger plans were quietly taking shape behind the scenes. Prime Minister Mark Carney sat down with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy on the margins of the G7 Leaders Summit in Evian-les-Bains, France, and made an announcement that extended Canada's Russia sanctions record to one of the largest individual country sanction programs in the world. Canada will impose new sanctions on Russia in a package that will target 162 people, entities, and vessels, all assets of the Russian war machine. The announcement came alongside a deepening drone production partnership, support for Ukraine's Patriot missile requests, and a specific condemnation of Russia's strike on the Kyiv-Pechersk Lavra, one of Ukraine's most historic religious sites. The numbers behind Canada's accumulated Ukraine support are documented and specific. In 2026, Canada provided $2.8 billion in military assistance to Ukraine and imposed sanctions on more than 3,400 individuals and entities, as well as 600 vessels. The 162 new designations announced on June 16th add to that cumulative sanctions record, targeting 4 distinct categories that directly serve Russia's ongoing war capacity: the Shadow Fleet, energy revenues, the defense and industrial sector, and the disinformation apparatus that supports the Kremlin's domestic and international propaganda operations. Russia's Shadow Fleet is the specific infrastructure that has allowed Moscow to continue selling oil globally, despite the G7 price cap mechanism and Western sanctions on direct Russian energy purchases. The Shadow Fleet consists of hundreds of aging tankers, many operating without conventional insurance, registered under obscure flag states, and changing names and ownership records to obscure their role in Russian energy exports. Revenue from that oil continues funding the Russian military budget. The leaders discussed formats for defense cooperation and Canada's participation in financing the production of Ukrainian drones under the Danish model. Particular attention was paid to increasing sanctions pressure on Russia, particularly on its energy and financial sectors, and on the Shadow Fleet. The Danish model of drone financing that Carney and Zelenskyy discussed represents a specific and documented approach to supporting Ukraine's drone warfare capability. Denmark committed to funding Ukrainian drone production, directly contributing to the development and manufacturing of domestically produced Ukrainian unmanned systems, rather than simply purchasing and transferring existing platforms. Canada's participation in financing production under that model positions the country not as a donor of surplus military equipment, but as a co-investor in Ukraine's own defense industrial base. The distinction is operationally significant. Ukraine is now one of the largest producers of military drones in the world by volume, with hundreds of thousands of FPV strike drones, reconnaissance platforms, and maritime attack drones manufactured domestically each year. Financing that production pipeline sustains Ukrainian strike capacity independently of what individual ally nations can physically supply from their own stocks. We're working more closely on production of drones together, and we'll discuss the next stage of that, Carney said during the bilateral meeting. The Patriot missile system discussion reflects the most pressing air defense gap Ukraine currently faces. Russian forces have continued to target Ukrainian cities, power infrastructure, and civilian facilities with ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and Shahed-type drones throughout 2026. The Kyiv-Pechersk Lavra strike that Carney condemned during his meeting with Zelenskyy is one of hundreds of documented Russian attacks on civilian infrastructure since the full-scale invasion began in February 2022. Patriot surface-to-air missile systems are among the most effective platforms capable of intercepting Russian ballistic missiles, but they require a continuous supply of interceptors that are expensive to manufacture and in limited global supply. Zelenskyy told reporters following the G7 working session on Ukraine that the assembled leaders supported Ukraine's request for more Patriot missiles and discussed how to increase production. That production increase discussion reflects the fundamental constraint. The interceptors are being consumed faster than existing manufacturing lines can replace them. Zelensky's public statement following the bilateral with Carney described the full strategic picture of what the G7 meeting on Ukraine achieved. Ukraine will win. It is just a question of time. It is just a question of how much senseless slaughter Russia perpetrates. And what we see today is G7 unity in support of you and in moving forward, Carney told Zelensky during their meeting. Zelensky stated that Russia is not winning and that the partners understand the need to force Putin to end the war. The Prime Minister's office readout from the bilateral meeting added the reconstruction dimension of Canada's Ukraine commitment, one that extends the partnership beyond the current conflict into the post-war rebuilding program that Ukraine will require. Carney underscored Canada's support for Ukraine's reconstruction, including opportunities to leverage Canadian expertise in energy, infrastructure, and clean technology, and noted the importance of continued reform to bolster Ukraine's resilience. Canada has positioned itself as a potential significant contributor to Ukraine's post-war energy infrastructure reconstruction, relevant given Canada's expertise in both nuclear power and clean energy development, and Ukraine's documented interest in rebuilding its energy grid with modern, decentralized, and resilient generation capacity. In May 2026, speaking at the European Political Community Summit in Yerevan, Armenia, Carney had already announced an additional $270 million contribution to help Ukraine secure critical military capabilities. That announcement at Armenia preceded the June 16th G7 bilateral and the 162-person sanctions package, establishing a pattern of sequential, escalating Canadian support commitments across successive multilateral forums. Armenia in May, Evian-les-Bains in June. Each occasion producing a documented, specific new commitment rather than a general statement of solidarity. Canada also announced separately on June 16 that it had entered talks with Italy on the potential purchase of Leonardo M346 advanced jet trainer aircraft, a procurement that, alongside the Saab GlobalEye negotiations, confirmed on May 27th and the mixed F-35 Gripen fleet under active consideration, describes a Canadian government simultaneously rebuilding its own military capabilities and deepening defense industrial partnerships with European allies. The M346 trainer talks are at an early stage, and the number of aircraft under consideration has not been publicly specified. Russian forces launched 132 long-range attack drones, including Shahed-type drones, and 2 Iskander-M ballistic missiles against Ukraine overnight on June 15th to 16th. Ukraine's Air Force reported 3 people were killed and 68 were injured across Ukraine in Russian strikes in the 24-hour period surrounding Carney and Zelensky's bilateral meeting in France. The Kyiv Petrosklava, the cave monastery complex that Russia struck and that Carney specifically condemned, is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and one of the oldest and most historically significant religious institutions in Ukraine, founded in the 11th century. The G7 summit in Evian-les-Bains produced 3 joint statements on June 16th covering cancer research cooperation, Ebola response coordination, and international development financing reform.